Okay, so we're ready to do magic loop. And magic loop is wonderful for any time you're going to do circular knitting and you only have a few stitches to start with. It's great for socks, it's great for all kinds of circular knitting, but I especially like it for starting something from the center out, like a shawl, a circular shawl, so that I'm not trying to juggle a bunch of stitches, 2 or 3 stitches on each one of my DPNs. This is a lot easier. So I have the stitches that I cast on from my circular cast on, and what I want to do is I want to split them between 2 needles, and I'm going to be working in the round. So I've cast them onto the 1 needle to start with, and one of the things that's most important about magic loop knitting in general is the type of needles you use and the cable, especially the cable. This is wonderful, wonderful Addie's Click Lace. And these are the long tips. I love these tips. These are wonderful. So the idea of this is I've got a nice soft cable and I've got a nice smooth join. If you're using something like Clover that has the bamboo and the kind of funky join here and the really tough nylon cord, it's going to make it a lot more difficult. So I'm using something like either a 24 or a 32. 32 is really nice, a 32-inch nylon cord. And I've got my needles, and the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take all my stitches, my 9 stitches that I had cast on. Let me move this down a little bit so you can see it better. I'm going to take my 9 stitches that I cast on, and I'm going to move them right to the cable itself. So I've got them off the needles entirely, and I've got them in the cable itself. Now, if I was doing socks or if I was doing anything that I was doing in the round, I would push all my stitches right to the cable. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the center. So I've got an odd number, that's fine. I just need 5 on one, 4 on the other. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my cable and I'm actually going to squish it in half and squish it up through the center of those stitches. Okay, so I've got 5 on one side, I've got 4 on the other, and you can see that our tail from our magic loop, we can tighten that up in a sec. Don't worry about that right now. But the idea here is that I've got half the stitches on one side and approximately half the stitches on the other side of the loop itself. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold onto the loop and take my stitches and pull the loop through and pull the stitches so that I can position them up onto the needles themselves. Okay, so I've got half the stitches coming from the one side, half the stitches are on the other side. And what I want to do is I want to make sure that I'm now in what's called resting position. Okay, and resting position is going to be any time my needles are facing to the right. I have my needles facing to the right. We're going to call this resting position. And what's going to happen is I'm going to be knitting in the round this way. So half the stitches are going to be knit on one needle and half the stitches are going to be knit on the other needle. And what's going to happen is that entire group of stitches is one round. You have to get around all those stitches for it to be one round. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to find out, where is my yarn coming from? Well, my yarn is coming from this needle. That means that anytime your yarn is coming from the needle, that's the needle you're going to be using to knit with, and you're going to be knitting across the other stitches. Okay, so I have my other stitches, I want to work across those stitches, and I've got my other needle. So just remember that you look for where the yarn's coming from, where the last stitches that is on your needles, and where the yarn's coming from, that's the needle you're going to use. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just take my needle, I'm going to pull it out, and it's going to be a little scary. The stitches that I'm not working right now are going to go right down onto the cable. That's fine. Just leave them be. They're right there, they're fine. And I'm going to knit across the other stitches. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that my stitches are all positioned nicely and I can see where they are. And position your yarn in your hand and go ahead and knit across those stitches. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm at the end of half of the round. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this nice and tight. This is my tail from my magic loop and from my central cast on. I can just pull that nice and tight and keep that out of the way. So I've got the 5 stitches here. And now you can see my needle is pointing to the left. With my needle pointing to the left, I'm going to hold the tip of the needle and I'm going to take the cable itself from the other one and I want to slide all the stitches that are unworked, the ones that were on the cable before, back up onto the needle tip. And it's easiest if you just kind of hold the stitches in your hand. The first ones are a little bit tight, that's okay. And so what's going to happen is I've got the stitches that I just knit and I've got the other stitches and my needles are pointing to the left. The first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to point them to the right. I always get back into resting position. Now I'm in resting position. I see where my yarn is coming from. My yarn is coming from that top needle. And I don't really call it top or bottom or back. I just need to find out where the yarn's coming from. Best thing to do, position that yarn in your hand. First thing, if you're whatever hand you're going to position your yarn in, you want to make sure that it does not wrap around the needle. That would be a yarn over, and sometimes we do that, but for right now I want to make sure that the yarn's in the middle. I'm a continental knitter, so I'm going to position my yarn this way. I can see where the yarn is coming from. That's the needle I'm going to pull out. I'm going to pull that needle out, and these are the stitches that I'm going to be knitting across. The other ones are just sitting on the cable. So let's knit across these stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, I'm at the end of that half of the round. I'm going to drop this, hold on to the tip. If you don't hold on to the tip, it's very likely that you're going to pull this needle out. I don't want to do that. I want to make sure that needle, those stitches stay on that needle. And then I'm going to start pulling my cable through until I get my stitches back up onto the other needle. Those are the stitches that I had knit previously. Okay, there I am. I've got one round done. I'm at the end of the round, so what do I do now? Resting position. I go back to resting position. Okay, again, anytime you want to close up that hole in the center from that circular cast on we did, just go ahead and pull that nice and tight. Later on we're going to be weaving this tail in, but I can pull that nice and tight, and you can already see I've got a nice tight center there. Again, I'm going to take my yarn, I'm going to make sure that it's not wrapping around the needles. I want to make sure that, and that, the part that we just did, that first round is really the trickiest round, so you might want to practice that a few times. And then now it's actually easy. What's going to happen is each time I just get into resting position, find out where my yarn is coming from, pull that needle out, and knit across the stitches on the other needle. And you'll see in a sec, once I get to the end of this, here's the loops. This is one of the loops. This is the other loop. It's a little hard to see it, but there they are. That's magic loop. That's why they're magic loop. Here I am. I'm at the end of my round. Pull my stitches back up. And just make sure you hold on to everything so that you're not sliding them off the tip. Flip it over into resting position. Find out where my yarn is coming from. My yarn is coming from this needle. Position my yarn in my hand. Pull that needle out. Work across these. Once I've worked across the needles, and I've got everything back and I've done one round, and we go back to resting position, I like to put a marker on this side, and that side is the end of the round or the beginning of the next round, so I always know when I've done an entire round. And I would keep doing the same thing. Each time, just remember, back to resting position, find out where your yarn is coming from, position your needles in your hands, and just pretend that this needle, once you pull it out and you've got your other stitches in the cable, it's just your right hand needle. And continue across and keep going around in a circular, and that's your magic loop.